Hey everyone, and welcome to video number 3 on chapter 16, where we'll be discussing some aspects of religion in India during this time. Now, first talk about Hinduism. Hinduism is the dominant religion in India today. It's not the only religion that's native to India, though. Buddhism is from there as well. And the decline of Buddhism during this period really kind of led to the rise of Hinduism as being the dominant one. You know, obviously we'll talk about Islam later, but we don't associate Buddhism with India, even though it is the land of its origin, and that's because it was largely driven out. And it actually wasn't even really driven out by Hindus so much as it was by Muslims. You had a lot of Buddhist temples up in northern India, and then when Muslim invaders started to come in there, beginning in the 6th and 7th centuries, and then certainly by the 9th and 10th centuries, they were all driven out. Islam was not a big fan of certain aspects of Buddhism. And now all you have are kind of the ruins, like the famous temple at Nalanda, which is a shame that you really don't, have any lasting legacies in India itself from Buddhism. Another thing with the expansion of Hinduism was a development into devotional cults. Now, we tend to think of cults as being more like, satanic worshiping and things of that nature, but really it's just a more concentrated focus of worship. And these devotional cults, they offered more of a kind of direct path of salvation. Now, again, not salvation in the way we think of it in Christianity in terms of going to heaven. Hinduism still believed in reincarnation, but more of kind of, achieving one, union with Brahman and so forth. And they revolved around individual gods. And the two most prominent ones, one was about Vishnu. Vishnu was the preserver, in Hindu theology. Sometimes we would kind of travel down in these big poems like the Bhagavad Gita and give guidance to humans. And kind of cults around Vishnu stressed personal union and very intense devotion. And the other was about Shiva. Shiva was the destroyer. Here you see a very famous kind of figure of the dancing Shiva statues that emerged during this time. But also was a god of fertility. Remember, with reincarnation, it's a whole cycle. Not the destroyer in terms of like a god of evil, but more of just a god of the inevitability of death, but then you come back in reincarnation. For some of the cults, they held that the physical world is an illusion. This took a more rational approach. It was, in some ways, these Shiva cults were more similar to the Greek philosophers in their stress on logic. Now, Islam, Muslims make up still a good portion of India today. Obviously, it's led to a lot of conflict between Hindus and Muslims throughout the centuries, but Islam offered a certain kind of appeal to it that Hinduism could not, particularly among the lower castes. Islam didn't really take on right away. It did not attract large numbers at first, but started to really expand, by the years 1400 and 1500. The lower castes liked that Islam recognized the equality of all believers. They didn't hold to that strict hierarchy of the caste system with untouchables and so forth. This didn't always work out that way. It wasn't like they converted to Islam and then all of a sudden that they were treated as kings, but still, at least they weren't, being outcast from society the way that they were as untouchables. One particular branch of Islam that did appeal to Indians were Sufis. Remember, we talked about them a couple of videos ago, more of kind of that mystic emotional approach that appealed to Indians more to kind of their background of a more emotional connection, particularly with the Indians who were used to working with these guys called gurus, Guru, kind of Muslim holy men and mystics. There were kind of an easy similarities between them and Sufis. You also, during this time, had this thing called the Bhakti movement. It was a cult movement. It sought to end the distinction between Hinduism and Islam. And similar to Sufis and the gurus, it was more of kind of a celebratory, emotional kind of movement. And it kind of has a little bit of a hippie vibe to it. You see the picture, just kind of, with you picture all of them wearing tie-dye and making peace signs. Wouldn't be too different from things you saw in the 60s. Excuse me. In any event, this emerged in southern India in the 12th century, and it really stressed to kind of piety, kind of that self-devotion and, self-humbleness. But it also adopted certain aspects of Islam, like monotheism and spiritual equality, so it rejected the caste system. So that, even though it never really took off, it sought to resolve some discrepancies, some differences between Islam and Hinduism, and it helped assure that Islam would be there to stay. Okay, so that was it for this video, quick video, and then we'll have another fairly quick video. We'll be talking about Indian influence in Southeast Asia for the next one.